afternoon, members. I'm Julie Suleiman, Senior Research Analyst. So as Chair Munoz-Colon said, we will be discussing the State Teacher Equity Plan. This plan is required by the federal government. OSPI is responsible for developing and updating the plan. And in 2014, new guidance was issued by the federal government. And so this update is more extensive than ones that have been done in the past. So the process that OSPI is going through right now, and hopefully Maria will kick me if I get anything wrong, they have convened an equity plan leadership team, and OSPI requested that a staff representative from the State Board of Education sit on this team, and that it also includes members from various departments and offices within OSPI, and a representative, or a couple of representatives from the Professional Educator Standards Board. OSPI and partners are also facilitating focus groups, and these groups are analyzing gaps and discussing root causes for the gaps in access that students have to excellent educators, and strategies to close those gaps. And this afternoon, the board will be participating in focus groups. The OSPI has also conducted a working conditions survey that went out to teachers across the state. And the plan will all be finalized by June 1st of 2015, so in just a couple of weeks. The plans must include data on equity gaps, stakeholder outreach, and strategies for closing those gaps. So that's what will be discussed in the focus groups this afternoon. I will be providing in this portion of the presentation some key findings from the national body of research, and also an overview of the discussions that have been happening with the equity team. And then Superintendent Hill and her team from Pasco will provide you with some on-the-ground information about the challenges and successes that they have experienced in attracting, retaining, and growing excellent educators in their district. And then finally, Maria Flores from OSPI will introduce and lead members through the focus group process. So we have a packed agenda. All right, so what is an excellent educator? If we're going to be looking at whether students have equitable access, we should know what they have access to. So the minimum federal criteria are based on years of experience, high quality, which is defined by the federal government as having at least a bachelor's degree, being fully certified, and teaching within field. And then the third criteria of excellent educator is also teaching within field, so there's a bit of an overlap there. Washington will be adding components to this definition, and these have been finalized with the equity team leader, or equity leadership team. So the new definition for Washington will include deep content knowledge, engaging in professional development, pedagogical skills, so things like being able to use data to differentiate instruction for students, engagement, and this includes things like having high expectations for all students, creating safe and comfortable learning environments for all students, and then positive student outcomes, and this is the one that's future focused, so that will be more refined in later plans. So the equity team discussed not only what makes an excellent educator, but also how these things would be measured. And a lot of the measures will be coming from the TPEP criteria. So things like criteria number 1, which is having high expectations and communicating those expectations to all students. So the team was very deliberate about choosing components of a definition of excellent educator that could be measured. All right, so what are some of the access gaps? The federal government requires that the plans include access gaps for students of poverty and students of color to experienced teachers, highly qualified teachers, and teachers in field. Washington's plan will also include gaps for students that receive special education services and English language services. And then our future plans will also look at the additional teacher components that Washington has added to the definition of an excellent educator. So the Office of Civil Rights provided a state data package to Washington State, and that shows that students in poverty and students of color are taught at higher percentages of first-year teachers. Students in poverty are also taught at slightly higher percentages by teachers without full licensure or certification. And then students in poverty and students of color are also taught by higher percentages of teachers that are absent for 10 or more days. And OSPI has done extensive data analysis, which I wish I had brought my stack up here. It is incredible. But the preliminary analysis takes a deeper dive into what's going on in the districts and the ESDs and then also at the state level. And the preliminary analysis shows that students in poverty, students of color, students receiving and students receiving English language services are more likely to be taught by inexperienced teachers, and that is teachers with 5 years or fewer of experience in the teaching field. Students in poverty, students of color, students receiving English language services, and students receiving special education services are more likely to be taught by non-high quality teachers, or I'm sorry, non-highly qualified teachers. And then students in poverty, students of color, and students receiving the English language or special education services are also more likely to be taught by out-of-field teachers. So then the question becomes, what might be some contributing factors to this inequitable distribution that we see across student groups? And there are various root causes for these gaps. And some of them are general and might span populations, and some of them are more specific to the type of student population or the geography of the school district or other characteristics of the school district. So some causes that have been identified in the national body of research are salaries, and this includes both disparities across districts, so I'm a teacher and I can make more in Bellevue than I can in Kent, but also the lack of differentiation for more challenging work assignments within districts. So I'm working in a more challenging school or working with a more challenging student population, but being compensated at the same amount as a teacher that's not working with as challenging of a population. Working conditions, so things such as having effective leadership and having good collaborative relationships with your fellow teachers, and also in general the school culture. Do I feel safe there? Do I feel respected? And then high turnover and transfer rates. So if teachers are, as soon as they're reaching a more senior tenure within their teaching profession, are they leaving schools, certain schools for less challenging assignments? And then other causes that have been identified in discussions with the leadership team include access to professional development and growth opportunities. So things like, can I become a mentor, and do I feel supported in professionally developing and honing my craft as a teacher. Small applicant pools, so this can particularly be a challenge for rural districts. Do they have a selection of highly qualified candidates? And lack of teachers with endorsements in shortage areas, so things like lack of teachers with endorsements in English language learning or special ed or math or science. So some options that have been identified in both the research and in the equity team meetings for how we might consider closing the gaps include compensation reform, and this includes overall salary and incentives for taking more challenging assignments or working with more challenging student populations. Limits on local levy usage have also come up, and this was in the context of what we heard from Jack this morning on limiting the use of local dollars for basic education and teacher compensation so that there aren't disparities between districts. Building on school leadership capacities, so building principals' abilities to support teacher growth, foster collaboration, and create positive school cultures that teachers want to stay in. Teacher preparation programs, so encouraging students and teacher candidates to pursue shortage area endorsements, as well as mentorship programs or kind of a residency model where teachers feel really supported in those first couple of years in school. And then also professional development, so some sort of state funding for professional development so that all teachers in all districts have access to those opportunities for professional growth. All right, so what is the state board's role in the plan and going forward? So as I mentioned earlier, a staff member sits on the equity plan team, and board members will be participating in focus groups this afternoon. And then once the plan has been finalized and some strategies and recommendations have been made in the plan for how the state is hoping to address these equity gaps in access to high quality or to excellent educators, the board may wish to adopt legislative priorities that would support some of these strategies. So things like our legislative priority on state-funded professional development. We've already started to have some of those conversations. The board may also including some measure of excellent educator distribution in the indicators of system health and use that as a monitoring strategy to see how the state is doing in closing these gaps. All right, and with that, I'd be happy to take any questions, and otherwise we'll be passing it on to Sandra and her team.
We'll take a few questions here, Connie. Thank you for the background materials. They were very helpful. Several years ago, the Professional Educator Standards Board did a study about the effectiveness of the $5,000 incentive bonus for teachers to work in low-income school districts. And I'm not sure we ever heard the final results of it, but what I do remember is that it worked insofar as it attracted teachers to those schools that were just above the cutoff line. I mean, it was their high end of the high poverty. In other words, the ones that were, they chose those schools that were just below the level, but it was not an incentive to work with the kids that had the most difficulties. Do you have information? Looks like Maria's ready to go on that one.
Yeah, that study, Marge Plecki from the University of Washington did it, and what they found was that the schools that were on the challenging schools list, and it was a poverty measure, grew more nationally board certified teachers. They grew their own. It didn't move anyone. No one moved from a different school district into that school for that $5,000 bonus. And Marge Plecki posited that, one, it's not enough money. Also, it's not a bad thing that schools are growing their own national board certified teachers. But there was a lot of discussion about whether that was substantial enough, because it was $5,000 on top of the $5,000 they already received, so a total of $10,000 extra compensation. But it did not do, her conclusion, what it was expected to do, which was to move or redistribute teachers. Holly?
This is purely anecdotal based on one school, but our highest poverty school in my district, it has not, it has done exactly what you just said. People have national board certified teachers that certify when they're in another school do not transfer to that school. But what it has done, 30% of the teachers in that school are now national board certified, and they have not transferred out. I think one has transferred out in the last 7 years, and the other teachers transferring out that are highly experienced teachers are transferring out at a much higher rate, so it keeps them there.
Questions?
I hope that what I'm saying falls into the area of common sense, and if I have this wrong, help me with this. There are contracts between an education association and a local district, so naturally, when a position comes open in a school, someone chooses to transfer, and typically today, I'm guessing the process is when an opportunity comes in an environment that a teacher perceives as a better opportunity, the teacher leaves. So we focus primarily here on whether or not some kind of financial incentive would cause teachers to want to remain in a school that perhaps from their point of view has challenges.
So the group, the leadership team, actually hasn't leaned very heavily into that concept of bonuses, but they have leaned very heavily into that concept of compensation reform, that we have a few teachers entering the profession and then staying, that if we paid everyone adequately, that would change everything. So that seems to be the bigger focus, not this idea that bonuses would move anyone. I think one concept the group has talked about and hasn't finalized is the idea of not so much bonus pay, but differential pay for certain roles and responsibilities. So if I'm a special ed teacher and I have additional capacity, I have to do IEP meetings, data review, different roles and responsibilities. They've talked about, well, that's additional work, that's, almost into the realm of try, but it is work. It's work related to the role, it's additional. But they haven't finalized anything about that. I think the biggest recommendation and strategy that we're putting in the plan is compensation reform, everyone being paid a fair, comparable wage, and that there's less disparity. They're concerned about the effect of Everett School District having the grandfathered highest salary and additional tri-pay, a lot of additional tri-pay, and then the competition that happens with Darrington and all the districts nearby trying to buy the same teacher with the same credentials, and they can't compete. So that's where they're at, I think, if that answers it.
Great, so we're gonna move on to the next portion of this. Thank you so much, Superintendent Hope, for coming and being willing to share the work that you're doing here in Pasco.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I really want, is it on?
Yeah, you just gotta get up closer, sorry. I know
Be
it's-
really close.
Yeah.
I'm not a singer, so I'm not on strategy. I really appreciate the invitation to come and share a little bit about our challenges and some of the things we're doing to mitigate them. And I really want to thank those of you who were able to visit our schools yesterday and see a little tiny bit about who we really are. Because you sit and look at data and that isn't always the full story. So I really appreciate your team for being there. We titled our presentation today, The Perfect Pasco Teacher, a Values-Based Approach, because a few years ago, we took a long and hard look about who the teachers in Pasco needed to be to serve our highest need students in our most impacted schools.